G'day everyone, I'm Arjay Martin, lead Senate candidate for Queensland for the Great Australian Party. So I've taken on some feedback to try and make my videos a little bit more interesting, where I'm answering people's questions, get more to the point instead of, covering other sub-issues. So I'm going to try and do that, but in return, may you please undertake to share these videos to get the word out, and then I can have more videos that are shorter, that are more specific, rather than longer ones that might not be as enjoyable to watch. So a question asked by someone via email, and I'm omitting people's names unless it's just say from an organization where obviously the CEO or whoever's sending out the email doesn't mind their name being used, or if people ask me to use their names in these videos, then I'll do so. But this email reads, "Hi RJ, I just watched your latest video on your Gap YouTube channel and agree with a lot of what you said and wrote. Where do you stand on the statement, mass immigration is morally wrong? In appreciation of your time and effort in standing up in service of your country, kind regards." So I wrote back, and I'll just correct, I did have some typos in here where I basically answered with a phone, and that probably explains it. So apologies to the person who wrote to me, even though they didn't appear to mind, they didn't question it in the couple of emails that went back and forth. But I just noticed now that there's some typos, so I'll just correct those. Hello. There are different quantities and qualities of immigration. Quantity-wide, we have too much net migration into Australia. An example is that there are roughly 100,000 extra jobs per year, but 600,000 extra migrants. Some other figures quote 400,000, just so you're aware. That is crazy. It also doesn't give people time to assimilate if they come here and find only other foreign people. As for the quality of immigration, we should import compatible people who are happy to get along with Australians, not seeking to invade here and make us assimilate to their way of life / version of how the world should be. Cheers and thank you, RJ. So the lady wrote back, "Thank you for your quick reply, RJ. I agree with all your comments, but however, I also worry about taking the cream of the crop from the third world countries who can least afford to have their educated top performers stolen by Western countries. E.g., most of our doctors at the Townsville General Hospital are foreign with very heavy accents," so indicates that they're new arrivals. "I do not blame the doctors, but I believe our government entices them here to save money rather than educate more Australian doctors. Best of luck in your candidacy." So I wrote back, "Yes, the brain drain from the third world does not help the third world to become self-sufficient. Thank you." And then also another little interesting sideshow, but I'll be very quick, hopefully. So when I went to Newcastle University, we were told about the medical program there, and I don't remember the exact figures. It was quite a few years ago, but just say every year that university is allowed to graduate, say, 30 doctors, and it doesn't matter how good or bad the doctors are, they will graduate the top people as doctors though. But just say one year they have 60 people and they're all terrible, and they're only allowed to graduate 30, something like that, then they will graduate those 30 even though they're terrible as doctors, terrible, at measuring things or something like that, but they will graduate them regardless because they scale people up or down as necessary. Then the next year you might have 60 doctors or people studying to be doctors, and they're all absolutely brilliant. They should be all doctors. They would all be perfect as doctors. No one's perfect in itself, but you can be, perfect as something, as a doctor or an engineer or whatever. But they will only graduate, say, 30 of those 60 because that's all they're allowed to graduate of local doctors, which is ridiculous. And then also I combine this with another question that I've been getting a lot, and that is about multiculturalism. So the problem is that the media doesn't even know what multiculturalism is, or it lies, whichever way you want to look at it, misleads, deceives. So people are taught that multiculturalism means be nice to people from different backgrounds. You know, if someone's foreign, if they're visiting your country, or if they're, calling your country their own and becoming citizens, etc., or permanent residents, that you be nice to them and hopefully they reciprocate and be nice to you. You know, that's actually a good thing. That's, there's nothing wrong with being nice to people, and hopefully they are nice back to you. But that's not what multiculturalism is at all. Multiculturalism, the opposite of that, is assimilation. So under assimilation, you have new arrivals, let's just use that as an expression, and they come to your country, they learn to be your fellow countrymen or countrywomen, they learn your culture, they adapt to your culture, your language, your way of life. So in Australia's case, we love freedom, we allow women to walk around in bikinis without being raped or, murdered or, hopefully not even sexually harassed, that kind of thing. Whereas some people might be from countries where that's the opposite, and that they would, even extremely execute people for walking around public in a bikini, which is, completely evil and wrong and should never be allowed to happen here or anywhere else, really. So multiculturalism is that you have people coming from different cultures overseas, and they go to your country, they form their own, some people would say ghettos, other people would say, enclaves, exclaves, that kind of thing. They just hang out with their own people from, from their own culture, that is. That's, in this case, a foreign culture we're talking. And they, from cradle to grave, they basically just befriend and hang out with their own people. They have their own goals, ideals, and ideas, and they might well contradict the local culture, goals, ideals, and ideas. So I'm sure you can think of certain places in Australia where there's certain suburbs, say, associated with certain cultures, and that's an example of multiculturalism. So another problem with that, besides, one of the biggest problems is that you have different people and different peoples striving for different goals and pulling the country in different directions, that their version of heaven on earth, if you want to call it that, is completely different than this other group's. And a lot of the time, there are people imported into Australia from different cultures that basically hate each other, and they continue that on, even though, maybe a fight started 500 years ago or something like that. And it's like, well, 500 years ago, your people fought my people, attacked my people, that kind of thing. So they're going to continue that forever. So just using a country as an example, you have Lebanon. Lebanese Christians were brought to Australia with a civil war, and then Lebanese Muslims were also brought in later, and they don't get along, putting it nicely. And, for the sake of example, sure, you can find, Habib and Johnny or something like that, and they're best buddies, but that is not what always happens. It's not even normal for what happens if they're from these two groups that fight each other and have been for hundreds or thousands of years, as an example. So another interesting point with immigration is, I invite you all to watch a YouTube video. It's a TED or TEDx video called Immigration by Gumballs. It's very informative and interesting, entertaining, and, please leave a comment down below if you've watched it and what you thought of that particular TED talk. So Just quickly go through if any of these are related. Not particularly. So another problem with multiculturalism, sorry for jumping around, but the government actually forces it on to people. So as an example, with the Local Government Act in New South Wales, and I'm sure it's the same in every state and territory, even though really local government doesn't exist, it's really just a department of a state or territory government, especially after losing 2 different referenda on the issue. But the point is that under the New South Wales Local Government Charter, as a part of the Local Government Act, 1993 in New South Wales case from memory, they actually state that councils must force multiculturalism onto people or encourage multiculturalism. So that means that by definition, if they've got to do A, then they can't do B, which is encourage assimilation. So another example of that is that councils are more and more funding so-called foreign events such as Eid, as an example, which has nothing to do with traditional Australian values. There have been, Islamic people in Australia for a long time, including the first official terrorist attack, which was in about 1914, which some other people can go into, or you can look it up, about the Battle of Broken Hill. And anyway, so there's more and more funding for things like Eid and certain other activities. Just say there might be a Festival of Lights event for Indian people, for Hindus as an example as well. But as they're putting more and more funding in those things, they're taking it away from traditional Australian cultural activities such as Christmas, Australia Day, etc. So a real life example of Australia Day cut in funding was a few years ago when I was involved with Lake Macquarie City Council in New South Wales, probably 5 years ago, maybe more. Then they invited certain groups, stakeholders if you want to call it that, and I was among them, to an Australia Day, what do you call that, like event planning activity day. And the council and the police backed them up, and it seemed very much like the police were coached exactly what to say. They claimed that fireworks were very dangerous, that they encourage people to get drunk and have fights and all this other stuff, which is garbage in itself. But I stood up and just say there's 60 people in a room or whatever, and I did my little speech why we should maintain the fireworks, that it's traditional cultural activity, that it is not accurate what the police were claiming about the violent activities caused by fireworks, etc. And then more and more people started standing up and agreeing with me, even though they were too scared perhaps to speak in the first place. If they were leaning on the side of keeping the fireworks, then other ones were convinced that we should maintain that culture. And so the money was going to be spent anyway. It could have been on fireworks or some other less Australian things on Australia Day. Australia Day should be about celebrating Australia. Sure, if you want to have a multicultural day, have that as well. But Australia Day should be about celebrating Australia and Australian things. Also, there is, I guess you'd say, foreign interference in Australia and elsewhere, such as local government, as they call themselves, or councils as they really are, receiving direct instructions from institutions associated with the United Nations, as just one example. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Agenda 21, and if you haven't, then it'd be a great idea for you to look up about that. But there's also other organizations which, if you look into it, are actually arms of the United Nations, such as ICLEA. I'll just try and find, I had a tab open somewhere. So ICLEIA, and that's also known as Local Governments for Sustainability. It was founded in 1990 in New York City, and ICLEA stands for the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. So you have Australian councils receiving direct instructions from the United Nations. And this is just one of many, many examples where that occurs. So just on Wikipedia, it goes on about the Tea Party movement activists targeted ICLEA, however you pronounce it, for its support of Agenda 21, a non-binding United Nations initiative that seeks to promote resource and land conservation. The activists claim that local government effort to expand public transportation and preserve open space were part of a UN conspiracy plot to deny property rights and herd citizens towards cities. So then it goes on. Obviously, that's been heavily censored by Wikipedia because people aren't just claiming that because people want to expand public transport that is the UN trying to take over the world and herd people into cities, that kind of thing. But I'm sure if someone added much more to that it would just be deleted. That covers immigration and multiculturalism a little bit. There is some other questions on Sharia law and the Islamization of Australia, stopping Islamic terrorist attacks, in which case you should stop all terrorist attacks. And it goes on about providing non-halal food for people who are not Muslims. For this particular person, it asks a bunch of questions. So Sharia law has no place in Australia. It is currently practiced in Australia. Anyone that says otherwise is either lying or misinformed. An example is there's little arbitration courts or tribunals where people of the Islamic faith can go divorce their wife by saying, I divorce you 3 times. It extends to things like inheritance rights, that women only inherit half as much as a man, that a woman needs double the amount of witnesses for a crime than a man, that kind of thing. It is very bad, and that should be stopped. So even people like Imam Tawhidi, or the Imam of Peace as he calls himself, he says that we shouldn't have Sharia law in Australia, or something like that, just from my memory. I think that was from a Tommy Robinson video. And you have a lot of people that claim that they are fleeing persecution in XYZ country. They come to this country, and a lot of those people unfortunately want to start persecuting people here based on exactly the same things that they claim to have fled. And of course, there are genuine refugees, there are fake refugees, there are economic migrants posing as refugees, some of which want to just have 20 children, something like that, and live on the dole forever, basically. That is not good. It is not compatible immigration to have people like that coming into this country and staying here. I already addressed the terrorist attacks. We shouldn't allow terrorist attacks of any kind. And there's also a question about non-halal food for people who are not Muslims. So within the Bible itself, it states something like people are banned from eating food that has been blessed or dedicated to a foreign god, to another god. And sure, there'll be people argue that Allah is God, as in the Christian God, but facts speak differently. So that's one particular issue. Another interesting thing is that halal food does have a lot of bad publicity, and rightfully so, but there's also kosher food where, just say, the animals are slaughtered basically in the exact same fashion. You'll have a cow go to a machine, get flipped upside down, have its throat chopped out, and put back down on the ground to panic and slip and slide in its own blood. I have seen videos from, kosher and halal slaughtering in abattoirs, and it's very disturbing, and I don't recommend you watch it, but it's terrible. But they have in their belief that the animal has to panic basically to get as much blood out as possible because they aren't allowed to eat blood. But compare that to the Western method, which is to stun the animal. Just say you get a cow and shoot a bolt into its brain, or electrocute the chickens or something before you kill them. Then we should go with the more humane way while that's available to us. We should not have any religious food taxes, which halal and kosher both are. You do have companies. Sorry about my phone calling. So you do have religious food taxes, and they shouldn't be allowed. So just a couple other things on halal/kosher. You do have certain businesses being blackmailed literally by these companies saying, hey, if you don't certify your food with our particular religion, we're going to get our XYZ number of members to not purchase anything from your company, to boycott your company. A lot of businesses do want halal or whatever certification so that they can export, say, food to Indonesia or whatever. But if they do that, it should only apply to the food that they're sending overseas. You have, some rabbi or a mullah or whatever go bless an animal before it gets slaughtered, and have to have, say, Muslims handling the animal from the farm or the abattoir to packaging, and that is in itself very discriminatory. They're claiming that to not allow that would be discrimination against them, but they're discriminating against people that don't follow their faith, that don't want to pay a religious tax, a jizya tax, whichever way you want to call it. And you even have people like Dick Smith, who came out years ago and said something along the lines of, when people were questioning why he wouldn't, get religious certification of food, he's pointed out that he doesn't have, Christians, Catholics, Protestants, whatever, going to his business demanding that he pays them money to, certify their food. So why should he go and do it with these other faiths? And that's exactly right. We shouldn't have that at all. Also, within Islam itself, they don't actually require halal certification. You didn't even have halal certification take off as a business until, say, the 1970s, and then progressively more and more so in the Western countries up until the 2000s. All I have to say is piss mullah over their food, and that's fine for them to eat it, even if it's completely haram, forbidden food like pork or bacon. If they've got no other food available, supposedly, i.e. no halal certified food, or just halal food generally, they can even eat bacon, etc. I know quite a few Muslims that eat bacon and ham and have tattoos, both of which equals death in their religion. So obviously, to the diehard Muslims, they wouldn't be Muslims at all. It's just like, you have homosexual Muslims that are lucky enough to be born in places like Australia or live in Australia, where they don't get thrown off the tallest building in town because their prophet ordered it, basically. Despite him having a homosexual donkey called Jafar. It's interesting. Find out about it. So that'll probably do for this video. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and send more questions to vote.a.martin@gmail.com. And I'll make some more videos. I think this might have a little bit of a sync issue that I'll have to fix up, where the sound doesn't seem to be matching the images, but Thank you for your time. I hope it's educational, informative, and not boring. Thank you.